And we're live. All right. Hooray. It is officially showtime at Cobbs Corner. Uh, Welcome, everyone, to Cobbs Corner. I am your host, Morgan Cobbs, and I am joined today by three very special guests. Um, the directors, Jason Greer and Vanessa, and author Aimee Baker. The three of them are involved in the documentary She, which you can find on Amazon Prime and on most streaming services. I'm so glad to have you guys here on Cobb's Corner. This is, we actually haven't reviewed documentaries on this podcast. It's been primarily, action and sci-fi films, Marvel and DC and Star Wars. But I'm very happy to have you guys, and pretty much going to turn the floor over to you, let you guys just kind of talk about the documentary and kind of your background in like filmmaking and in writing. So have at it.
Okay, well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
And for going outside genre and doing documentary.
Of course, of course.
So I guess I'll start. So I am a writer. I did not start out being a poet, but I ended up writing a book of poetry about missing and unidentified women in the United States, and trying to call attention to their stories and honor them through poetic form. And poetry, there's a lot of poetry readers in America, but it doesn't get enough credit for what it does, and it's not like my book has on its own like made it into like tons of hands across the United States. So it kind of like that's where my project was when Jason and Vanessa entered the scene.
All right, yeah, sounds good. Jason and Vanessa, you guys got anything?
Yeah, so we all come from, like we were saying, a small town. So we knew about Aimee's book, and I was reading it at the same time that Jason was discussing possibly making a documentary. He didn't know what he wanted to make one about, though. And then Aimee's book came in, and it seemed like the perfect match for what we were doing, and became a really great project. So Jason reached out to Aimee. And then we ended up.
Yeah, with a little coaxing, we got Aimee on board as we began the project, and it really didn't start out as the film that it is today. It really just started out as a small project to see what we could do, and probably we were thinking a 20-minute documentary or something like that, and it just kind of snowballed into a feature-length documentary with multiple talent on board and helping out with the film, and now we're about 2.5 years it took us to complete the film totally. Part of that was due to COVID, kind of slowed us down for a little bit, but lots of legwork and things behind that to get to where we were, and then finally full release last December.
Sounds good. Gosh, the documentary, I watched it from start to finish, and I loved it. A lot of great stories. And what I found interesting was the fact that there's all these different cases of women having gone missing, and then they don't get found until 30 or 40 years later. I mean, I'm wondering like how, I guess for you, Aimee, like when you were doing like the research for this documentary, like what was it like? What was it like? I guess going through these old cases and I guess cold cases, and then just rediscovering them years later.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. Like in my book of poetry, the oldest case is from it's a missing woman from the early 1900s who was, her body has never been found that we're aware of, all the way up to like women who had gone missing, like, you know, the year that I was writing the poem for them. So, you know, the process was, it's like, you know, how to break your heart over and over every day while writing this book of poetry, and trying to do something with that and trying to explore it. So it was incredibly hard and difficult to explore these cases and explore cases that people have not really heard of widely before, and try to figure out, like, do I have the right to write about them? Do I, like, who am I to be doing this project? So it was this, you know, mess of emotions, I would say, in the creation of the actual book.
Right. One I guess bit of information that you brought up in the documentary, and I guess hence the shirt I'm wearing. It's the
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Yes, and coincidentally, well, let's see, 2 days before the recording of this episode was International Women's Day, and so happy belated International Women's Day to to everyone listening. You had said how there's a multitude of cases of women of color who go missing every year that are not reported or are like unsolved.
Right.
per
So
year.
so what we know is that if you look at like raw numbers, right, there are more missing white women than missing women of color. But if you actually see at how that works out proportionally by population, right, we have drastically high numbers of like particularly missing Black women in the United States. And what happens is, like, if you think about what kinds of news coverage you've seen recently about, you know, women who are missing or women who've been found, what you're going to see on the news is likely that they're going to be young white women, right? So when I was writing this book of poetry, I learned about when Eiffel had coined the term missing white women syndrome, where it's just like, what happens is the news media and police and all the attention is focused so much on white women that the stories of Black women from the very start are just not covered. And what I was seeing in like police details and the kinds of information I could find about women of color is that there were very few details available, indicating that like there was not as deep investigations, there were not as deep news coverage. And so part of creating Doe is also trying to find a way to talk about ways that we can change that effectively.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Gwen Eiffel. She was actually my cousin.
Gwen Eiffel is your
Yeah.
cousin.
Yeah. Well, it's the third cousin. She was first cousins with my grandmother, who is actually the older sister of Sherilyn Eiffel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Sherilyn Eiffel is actually my aunt. So. Yeah. It's actually you know, it's funny you brought her up, and I see the stamps of, you know, Gwen Eiffel all around.
Like legend and icon, right?
Yeah. just you know, casually just see her on PBS. It's like, oh yeah, my cousin.
All right.
It's
fun.
But yeah, that's definitely going in like by bio from
just like where you insert it in.
Like casually, it's like you know, yeah, Cobbs Corner podcast. You know, we love TV, we love film, we love pop culture, and I'm also Gwen Eiffel's cousin. You know, but yeah.
Yeah.
I guess this next question, and I'm really kind of just like going off the top of my head at this point.
That's okay.
Again, I guess this is kind of for all three of you, Jason and Vanessa, you guys can kind of chime in. Do you feel that as a documentarian or as a journalist, as an author, that when you see cases being swept under the rug, do you think that in today's day and age, you guys bear the responsibility of the Upton Sinclairs, the like muckrakers of like a century ago, so essentially, like, does that burden fall onto you guys as filmmakers to expose the lies and expose the double standards in really just in general, but I guess in specifically in your case, Aimee, of exposing the cases of the numerous women of color that go missing, and it's not like brought to like the media's attention. It's like when the mainstream media fails to bring these cases to light, do you guys as authors and as filmmakers have a responsibility to bring them to light?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Jason and Vanessa because I'm sure they have their own answers for it. This is an interesting question because when I started writing my book, it took me a while to realize that I personally was not highlighting the cases of missing women of color. I was picking a lot of the easier stories to tell where there were a lot of information available, and those tended to be missing white women. And I personally was picking stories where I just felt like, like it just seemed like a version of myself. Like there's one person I talk about in the documentary, like I just feel like she was like me as an alternate version of me as a like teenager, right? So I actually personally had to like call myself out and work to change how I was approaching this book. And so when I think about what I'm doing, like I want to, one, call attention to the issue, but two, I think we get to the part where we call attention to the issue and then we stop. We just sort of center on like this, like there's an issue. We're not covering those stories. And we don't move to the part where we actually cover those stories or talk about those stories. So like we get stopped at there's an issue and we don't actually move towards solution, right? So I feel like my job as a poet and writer and human is to start saying those women's names, talking about their stories, calling attention to their stories so that people hear them from me. So that I'm part of, like, I'm modeling what I want to see in the world.
Right.
No, and I think as documentarians, one of our jobs, and we discussed it a lot when we were making this film and we're making other films, is to not be biased. We should be documenting it as it is, and I think sometimes that involves calling things out because we're wanting to actually highlight what is happening, not a version of what's happening. Like so it became necessary to incorporate like Aimee was saying, the missing white women syndrome and some of the other cases kind of not being highlighted in the same way. It's as being definitely unfair, definitely unethical. And we wanted to really highlight that as part of the movie too. So it's sharing it as it is, but also, yes, definitely calling those things out if that's what's happening, and it definitely is what's happening.
And yeah, the other thing that we did in the film really tried to do is kind of reframe the way that some of the true crime documentaries are. A lot of them are more salacious or focusing on the serial killer or the murderers or those things, and they're not talking about the victims. And at the same time, that does exactly the same thing to all of these victims, where we're again kind of sweeping them under the rug to talk about this guy that did this bad thing, and we're not giving justice back to those people. So in our film, we didn't mention their names whatsoever, and we really tried to change the focus of the documentary and honor all of the women that we were talking about in the film. And I think it's something that's it's hard. It's not hard to do. It's a harder sell. You can sell the salacious stuff. You can get more people to watch it if you're doing that. But in this topic that we're talking about, it's not the right thing to do. And that's really what we were trying to do with the film. It's what Aimee did with her book, and we really wanted to keep that throughout the whole film and the whole process.
Good. So I guess Jason, like to your point about like not taking the focus away from the victims, would you say that with shows like, although I haven't watched it, there's the Dahmer series on Netflix, and there's like all these different like true crime, because even like I see ads for like true crime documentaries on Hulu all the time. There was like one that was like still missing Morgan. Better find her, whoever Morgan is. Okay. Would you say that there should be more mainstream documentaries like yours, like where as opposed to telling the story from the standpoint of the serial killer who, murdered all these people, maybe instead framing it as a story that's told from the victim's perspective, whereas, their, kidnapper or whomever is there, but they're not the focal point. Like, do you think that in, I guess, Hollywood and like dramatization, that there should be like sort of adaptations of like your documentary and of these stories in mainstream media? Do you think that would help as well?
I think it would help. It would definitely help. I mean, everybody's interested in these people and why they did the things that they did, and I mean, in trying to figure out, why they were who they were, and I, you understand that. But on some of the documentaries too that we've watched, you have the victims, and they end up taking images of them, dressed, in the most provocative clothing or something like that. And that's the photo that keeps being shown of that victim. And by doing that, you're kind of painting a picture of this person that's not necessarily true to any of the subject or the storyline. So in some ways, you're hurting the victim more. You're pointing fingers almost at somebody, even if it's accidental. It's not. It needs to be. I think it needs to be thought through a little bit more, especially if we're trying to honor the victims. A lot of the documentaries, most people can name a serial killer or two or three. Most people can't name a serial killer's victim. And
right. Yeah, which is what I was going to say. Like, like I've personally not watched Dahmer because it's just not in the way in which I interact with crime and true crime, right? But I would say like anyone who has watched it, like the takeaway should be like, okay, so like at the end of watching however many hours of Dahmer there is, right? Like whose name do you remember? Do you remember the names of any of his victims, right? Or is it just Dahmer, right? Yeah. So like I read a lengthy poem sometimes at my public performances. It's like a 12-parter. It's all women who are connected to a very famous serial killer, and I never mention his name. But at the end of the reading, inevitably I have someone who comes up who knows who it is just by like the amount of women that I have talked about and the dates, and they really want to talk about him, right? And I'm just like him specifically, not the women. They don't want to know anything more about the women that I've talked about, but they really want to discuss him. more.
Yeah.
So I think like our us collectively, I'm not gonna like fault anyone for actually, you know, watching true crime in that way, but us collectively as creators and humans, like how can we change that?
Right. So yeah, I guess that was going to be another question. Like I know, Jason, you mentioned how a lot of these victims, like there'll be that one photo where they're like dressed provocatively. It's like, is that also part of this sort of like narrative that like it was the victim's fault? And I think, and I recognize like we live in the Me Too era as well, and not to go down the political rabbit hole, but I remember back in like 2016 during the 2016 election, there was the like there was the infamous Access Hollywood tape where, you know, then presidential candidate Trump, you know, he admitted to having grabbed so and so inappropriately, and usually please don't demonetize me, and so but then I guess one of the claims that I had heard, I was watching a panel on, is a YouTube channel called Vice, the Vice News. I think they did a panel with I guess liberals and conservatives within the Latinx community, and a lot of the women in that community were saying that with comments like that, it's the victim's fault because, you know, like, oh well, she was probably a groupie, or probably was, you know, probably only, you know, following Mr. Trump for his money, or, you know, certain women will allow men to, you know, but which I don't agree. Just let the record show I do not agree with those claims. I think, you know, victim blaming is wrong in any sense. We actually, I was just at our UB campus slam last night where we had an open discussion about sexual harassment and that sort of thing. So do you think that when an incident happens, the victim should be painted in a positive light as well? Like they're, you know, they weren't a bad person, like they didn't just allow this to happen, that they are an individual who's deserving of the same rights that we all enjoy here in the United States, that they're no different from any of us.
Yeah, I mean, I wish, what I would say, Jason and Vanessa can answer on their own, but personally, like, I don't think we have to craft a narrative about anyone that sort of, you know, erases parts of them to make them more like palatable for news coverage or believable in any way, right? But I do think that, like, you know, when we're talking about like victims of crimes, particularly like sex crimes and murder and assaults, you know, the reality is like everyone is just living their everyday lives in like whatever those pathways and parameters are, right? Like, you know, no no one is asking to be like sexually assaulted or murdered or kidnapped or anything, right? Are certain situations riskier than other situations? Yes, but like women have to guard against that all the time. Like, you know, when I was creating Doe, like I would come across like all these like missing women who like had gone missing from gas stations in like the 1970s, who were like working at gas stations at night. And like now typically you're not seeing tons of women working alone at gas stations at night, or women who went missing because of hitchhiking. So like we already are crafting all of these like lessons that we're learning, you know, and our world gets like collectively smaller, all the things that we can't do, right? Like how to be safe in America as a woman, just like don't like you can barely like exist sometimes. Like are you safe in your own home now? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I
And
mean, you go ahead.
Yeah, and as a filmmaker, I think it's again, like Aimee said, we don't need to like craft a positive persona for these women, but at the same time, we need to be realistic on who they actually were. So sometimes, you know, like there are many layers to most women, and sometimes we feel like when we're watching some documentaries, it's all shifted to one side. Like they're leaving out maybe the family side or the softer side, and they're trying to go to the other side to make it look like this was somehow deserved. But I think it just needs to be a more balanced, realistic view of who these victims were.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess as a documentarian, like you want to be unbiased and you want to be independent and kind of just give the facts and make sure that the viewers are informed and not necessarily influenced one way or the other. But would you say that a victim's like upbringing and their family life, like many victims of rape, they may not have the best home life. Maybe a lot of them aren't comfortable going to their parents saying that something happened, or when they do tell people, they're not believed, and then because then that's also a lot, where a lot of cases get swept under the rug. So would you say that there's a bit of disparity, like irregardless to race, there's like a bit of disparity in cases that will actually see the light of day and cases that won't, based on other factors like income, like home stability, or I should say
Mhm.
domestic life and that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
So, some other factors that play in are, like come from like higher incomes, right? Particularly like younger women who are coming from like poorer socioeconomic backgrounds. Like it's hard to get them the same amount of coverage, right? Like also just like aesthetic beauty, right? Like attractive by like US standards of attractiveness will get you like those cases more coverage. So there's all these like factors that are interplaying about like who we decide matters and who doesn't matter, right? And it's just like this unfortunate situation in which like we all kind of play into it every time like we're consuming those news stories and not questioning like, I'm seeing this case and it's great that I'm seeing this case on the news, right? Because that person deserves coverage and she deserves to be found, but also alternately, whose stories might I not be seeing and why, right?
Now, would you say that the like westernized beauty standards have played a negative role in a lot of these cases that don't see the light of day because the victim doesn't fit that typical Western, blonde hair, blue eyed
Mm-hmm.
beauty
Yeah.
standard? So,
Yeah, definitely. It's shocking to see, like, I mean, like, particularly even like the fact that like we tend to see cases of missing women who are under the age of 25, right? Like 15 to 25, like that's kind of like a spot where you'll be more likely to hear those stories. But like there are missing women who are in their 70s, their 60s, right? And they're not making the news in quite the same way.
right. Would you say that perhaps, well, I guess like you just said about how women who are in their later years in life will go missing, and then we don't really hear too much about those cases. Do you think maybe that's because like we as a society have deemed that, like, regardless of gender, whether or not you're man or
Mhm.
woman, it's like over a certain age, it's like you've pretty much lived out your like prime years on the earth. Like you've lived out like all the
Right.
important years on
Yeah.
the earth. Like I think even back in like 2008, Louis C.K. again, YouTube, don't demonetize me. He had this whole bit on how he had just turned 40 and how the doctor told him, like, well, you've got a couple meaningful decades left. You know, I'm trying. Okay, see,
It's all downhill from
I'm
here,
trying not to
Morgan.
make this. Please don't walk off. Doing my best not to make this.
No, it's okay. We all have a few meaningful decades left.
I'm only 22 years old. Okay. Right.
You're not.
I'm also trying not to make this episode all like depressing, sad. But,
Morgan, I have to say, so I teach college, right? And yesterday my students were talking about like old people, and they were like, people in their 40s, and I was like, ouch. And then they like turned to me and they were like, what year were you born? And I was like, we don't talk about it.
it's like it's funny. I remember last year my aunt, my great aunt, her birthday fell on Thanksgiving, November 24th. We didn't put her age on the cake. We just put 1957, I think. I think we just put the year that she was born. It's like
just let everyone do the math. The math.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be me after I turn 25. I'm like, okay, yeah, 2001.
Well, yeah, Morgan, is just it's downhill after 25. It's pretty bleak out there.
Well,
I mean,
back to
I
my
think
original point.
We're a bunch of old 40-year-olds, so.
It's like,
well, I mean, I do think like, I remember like, so my dad passed away. He was 69 when he passed away. And I just remember someone coming to me and they, like everyone tries to say something like kind when it happens. And they were like, he lived a long life. And I was like, the man was 69. Like he was just like, he had years left. Right. I just think that's like, fairly typical. Like, I was just, there's a news report of a woman who recently passed away in an accident, and they were like calling her this elderly woman. Like all the news report, elderly woman dies, and I was like, she was like 71. Like, and maybe I'm feeling it now more that I'm like on the other side of 40. But
yeah.
I do think that like we put all this emphasis on like things like youth and beauty and money, right? And so that's we will see those stories populated in our news media, right? So which leaves out like so many missing persons, so many victims of crimes when it comes to something like the project that we're working on.
Right. Yeah, because I guess there's this notion that I guess I can include myself in this demographic because I'm under the age of 30. But I guess there's this notion that like I remember it's funny, I actually graduate in 2 months. I'll be graduating from university from UB.
Congratulations.
Yep. Thank you very much. Gonna go live in the Pacific for 2 years. We'll get to that. I was at the commencement last year, and this is actually my 5th year of undergrad, so I was technically supposed to graduate last year. And friend of mine was graduating, so I attended the commencement. And Danny Glover spoke. Actually, we actually got Danny Glover to speak, and then he like at some point in the speech said like, this graduating class of 2022, you guys are the future. You are the youth. You're going to change the world, which I feel like is said every graduation ceremony.
I mean, I feel like when I graduated, someone said the same, and so I'm still working on it. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah. So would you say that we live in, and not that like the youth, not that like not that our lives aren't important, like not that Gen Z, not that like my generation, that we are not going to change the world. I mean, I think you look through history, every generation has their like tragedy. Like for the greatest generation, it was Pearl Harbor. For the baby boomers, I mean, anyone who grew up in the 60s, what didn't happen? For my parents, it was the Challenger mission. For millennials, it's 9/11. For Gen Z, it's COVID-19 and, well, global warming. So I think every generation like sort of has their challenges, but I feel like particularly here in the United States, we put an emphasis on the importance of youth and the importance of like I'm just wondering, like, do we live in a society, and please don't mean this, where we value youth, like the lives of the youth more than the lives of the like middle-aged and elderly, because I guess they're essential contributing members of society as well. With age comes wisdom. We need the elderly for wisdom and for inspiration to impart into the youth. But then a lot of these cases, maybe with the media, they want to appeal to the pathos of the viewers, whether you have kids or not, but especially to the mothers watching, to the fathers watching. When you hear that a child goes missing, then that appeals to that kind of like you kind of ask yourself, what if that were my son? What if that were my daughter? And then that causes more people who aren't even related to this person who went missing on the other side of the country. There's more action, there's more involvement, there's like GoFundMe's, and there's like a whole, all this like time and money is being pushed into finding these kids, literally. Whenever kids go missing, there's so many, and then you see like the true crime documentaries about them, but that same energy is not reciprocated for those who are in their 30s and 40s, and those who actually are parents that go missing, or grandparents that go missing. It's like, where's the news coverage for them? And I guess that's not really going to sell. And I don't want to sound preachy, but I feel like, not to rant or anything, but I feel like the news media, they care more about the ratings than they do about actual like news and actually finding these people. So I'm wondering, like, at what point are you just like showing us stories, not to invalidate the validity of these stories, but like at what point are you just pushing this narrative of like young people are going missing at an extremely alarming rate in this country, and then you're completely ignoring the fact that elderly people are also disappearing because that's not what sells. That's not how the media wants to take it and spin it. And
yeah, I mean, I think like the news media really treats viewers like we have like a limited amount of attention, or so it's like if I can memorize like 10 TikTok dances, like I can pay attention to like 10 missing persons case. Like we don't have limited attention. Like we don't need to act like there are like these like limited time resources in terms of coverage, right? Like if I can, consume news about like the, latest Haley Bieber, Selena Gomez dust up, right? Like I think I can like also, devote some of that energy elsewhere, right? So yes, it's not like we have limited attention or limited resources to do that, but we treat it like we do, right?
Yeah. Would you say that, and we actually talked about this at Slam one night, like what are the like problems we have with the younger generation? And like I had shared how I have 3 younger siblings, 2 are in high school, 1's in 2nd grade. I feel as if attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, and I feel like this kind of started before they were in high school. I can remember when I was in high school, we had every social media that we have today except for TikTok. TikTok wasn't a thing until my freshman year of college. So I just feel like everyone's like, we're so like programmed to scroll and to swipe, and like we like maybe we don't have like the bandwidth to like sit and have like intellectual conversations, kind of like what we're doing now. But I just worry that with like you said, with the rise of like TikToks, like we'd rather go and do all these TikTok dances, and we'd rather go and like see like what's like the good news, what's the, you know, manufactured news, like are we just like gravitating towards that, and then does the missing persons cases, they all just kind of get swept under the rug. And on top of that, like we don't, like you said, we don't really have the ability to sit and like watch the full like coverage. Like we just want the sound bites, we want the quick hits of like information, those quick hits of fear essentially. And but
Well, I mean, I think like, I don't know, like, so I have the advantage and distinct privilege of teaching college students, right? Like, and so like I watch them, and I don't think that there's a student that I encounter who would not describe themselves as feeling like somewhat exhausted, right? And I think like part of that is that the expectations of us in terms of our individual attention, so not like news media attention, like our own personal attention, like we're constantly being pulled at, right? Like I cannot be at home now without like hearing my email ding because there's a student messaging me, or hearing like my mom's like Facebook FaceTiming me, right?
right.
Like, you know, so like when I think back to like my teenage years and like early adulthood, like if I went home, like I could just be at home without just like feeling like people were constantly pulling at me, right? Like needing a response and needing me to respond constantly. So I feel like some of us just sort of scrolling endlessly on TikTok is just like sheer exhaustion. Like we're just zoning out. Like we're not, you know, thoughtfully consuming all the time, right? So I think that's part of it. And like our individual attention is just fragmented and pulled in so many different ways, right? But I don't know if Jason,
Right.
Vanessa, do you feel that way?
Well,
Yeah, yes.
I think too. I think no matter what generation it is, at some point, the older generation is going to say that the newer generation has a shorter attention span than they did, which isn't necessarily true. I remember when we were kids, we were being called the MTV generation because they said that we wanted everything sent at us really quickly on TV.
We could only think in music video length.
Only think really quick.
That was your TikTok back then, essentially.
It was.
And you had to watch, and you had to watch it like right when it came on. Like I know because I've been given the same speech by my parents. Okay, I know like they apparently it was really big when like the Thriller music video dropped and everybody would ran home to like, you know, turn on the TV.
So I think people are always just gonna, no matter like in 100 years from now, people will be accusing kids of having a shorter attention span. It's just, I think it's just what always has been. And maybe young people do. I mean, like Aimee was saying, there's a lot on your mind already. And then we have all of these things with our phones and with social media and everything as well. So it's, I know it can be distracting even as a parent having this constant need, because like when we first started having the internet and email for our company, it was usually, like pretty much expected that you'd get back to somebody within 24 hours. And now it's instant. Everybody expects that you're going to respond immediately. So I think it's just, I think it, like Aimee said, it's exhausting. Yeah. And I think we're all just tired, and it's hard to have a really long attention span on anything when you're tired. So
the technology, I mean, I think it's a blessing and it's a curse. I mean, I can do 90% of my work from my phone anywhere in the world now. But it is like that. Like we'll be sitting here, and before I would get an email and you could take time and respond to that person. I mean, I've literally lost jobs responding to somebody in 10 minutes. They're like, send you a message, you take 10 minutes to respond, and they're like, oh, I already found somebody. It's like they beat you to a 10-minute window, and that makes like me feel like, oh, I have to answer I got to look at my phone every time it chimes. And you know, what if it's something like that? And I mean, and that's just, you know, from me. I know our kids are, they're even more so with their phones. At the same time, they're connecting with people, they're doing their schoolwork, and they're getting a lot of that type of thing. But there's so much thrown at us so quickly. I guess there's only so much time and energy you can spend doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely hear you. I guess I wanted to bring up there was a stand-up special in 2017. I know I keep going back to comedians. There was a Dave Chappelle stand. I guess probably his like first stand-up special in years on Netflix. This was 2017, and he brought up how when he was in elementary school, there was the day of the Challenger mission, and he said how like his generation, like Gen X, like they were trained to care about like the world, and like you were trained to, I think especially like post World War II, like we were trained to care about stuff going on overseas. Like my mom even tells me how when she was in like kindergarten, like there was the Iranian hostage crisis, and they like had like moments of silence, and they actually like said prayers for the Iranian hostages in schools. And so I mean, like you were trained to care about things like that, but then there was also no internet, so you only really watch, and in most houses you had one television that everybody had to share. So there was only the 6 o'clock news or 11 o'clock news, and you had to watch it that one time. And there was no like, even the DVR was like a new thing back then. But the fact that today, like, we're just so bombarded with things, and I feel like being that I was born in 2001, I got that last taste of like pre-smartphones, last taste of like the analog era. But before everyone started like constantly being bombarded with stuff, like I remember watching a few music videos here and there on MTV, kind of before YouTube kind of took over in like 2008. Coincidentally, I'm actually live streaming this on YouTube. Oof, man, I tell you, if I get an email saying that I violated the community guidelines, yeah, I should stop talking.
It's with those
but-
documentary filmmakers. Yeah.
Yes, documentary filmmakers, right? Yeah.
Can't trust them.
but-
No.
Yeah, I know. Yes. I'm not allowed to say that. What have I done? But yeah, it's like I've one thing I've started doing is every week on just for Sunday, which I consider, for my calendar, I have Sunday put as the first day of the week.
Mhm.
For Sunday, I disable every social media app that I have on my phone for 24 hours. No social media, no news, nothing. Just for one day, just so that I can maintain my biological programming, so I'm not being constantly flooded with information. And I think it's the fact that I was fortunate enough to have experienced even just a slight taste of not life before the internet, but life before like social media really picked up. I think Gen Z, like millennials, were the first generation to grow up with the internet. Gen Z, we are the first generation to grow up with social media. But being that I'm an elder in the Zoomers, elder Zoomer, it's like I got the last little taste of like
Yeah.
the MySpace
Yeah.
era, and I just worry that like my younger siblings, especially my youngest sister who's in second grade, all she's known is like, I feel like her first word after, I think her first words were like dada, mama, tablet. It's like Disney's Plus. I remember, like, I think during the pandemic, like literally during the pandemic, like we actually purchased Disney Plus, HBO Max. Like we have a bunch of streaming services now. she had watched Coco, Pocahontas. Her whole world was Frozen, and like throughout the entire like time that I'm like that we're just at home, all I'm hearing is "Into the Unknown." I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking like, do I want kids?
Yeah. As a parent, I was into the unknown. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the unknown is right. But yeah, I guess like all she's known is this technology, and I only worry that when she's my age, she's 8 years old now, so she'll be my age in 14 years. My only worry is that when she graduates high school, she goes on to college, that she's not going to be able to put down her phone, and not just her, but her peers and like everyone in that age group. Like we're not going to be able to like have human interaction and just be able to sit and just like talk and have a civil conversation. My worry is that that's where we're headed.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
I mean, so this goes back to like, like what you were saying about like generations being like through watching the Challenger and a hostage situation, like being taught to care, right? Like, and I think like now it's just, we're going to have to like teach people like where are you putting your energy, and what gets your energy, right? What gets your time, right? And does what get your time line up with the things that you value, right? So I think like that's where those lessons come in, like, because sometimes things that dominate my time are not in alignment with the things that like I care about most, right?
Yeah.
And so so like what we're going to have to do is just like change how we talk about those things to like talk about, instead of necessarily like, I mean, we can teach people like to put down their devices and have time away from it, but also like when you hardcore look at like what are you giving your energy to, right? Yeah.
I guess going back to Dave Chappelle's bit on how like his generation was trained to care, he said how for like millennials and Gen Z, it's like we're being bombarded by technology and we've got like unlimited access to technology. It's that perhaps we're just so used to being pumped full of fear and full of like all this like information that we don't know what to care about anymore. So we kind of just throw in the towel. A lot of us, we just, there's like a bunch of stuff that's happening in the world that's out of my control. And at the same time, I'm dealing with my own, whatever I got going on in my life. But then at the same time, it's like I've got it better than, someone my age living on the other side of the planet who's having, who, is literally having like, who literally like their home is being bombed from the sky every other day. So, so it just comes to the point where it's like you're between a rock and a hard place. So you just kind of unplug and you just kind of give up. Essentially.
Yeah. I would say like our fear greatly does often outpace like reality, right? Like if you ask most of America about crime rates in America right now, if they were to like plot on a chart where the crime rates in the US are, they are going to be really out of skew of reality, right? Like the reality is like violent crime rates have fallen in the United States, but people don't believe that because all they see, and technology has allowed us to see, crime everywhere, right? And so it doesn't feel like that's true, right? It's kind of like when I don't know if you've experienced this, but Jason and Vanessa might have, like, online frequently I see people like locally to where we are, they'll be posting like about like some creepy guy following them in Target, or there was a van in the parking lot, like be on the lookout for like traffickers are going to get you. And as someone who's been writing about crime for a while, I'm like, that, like, realistically speaking, could you be kidnapped from a parking lot. Does that happen? Has that happened? Yes, that has happened. The chances, though, the reality is that like trafficking, people are more likely to be trafficked by someone they know. So like look around at your relatives first before worrying about some like person walking in Target in the kids section, like before you like panic, right?
Yes,
It's
everybody,
it's funny you
take a
bring
second
that
look
up.
at Uncle Barry.
Yeah, because I've seen those. We live in the same area, so I've seen these things that Aimee's talking about, and I don't know as much about crime rates. Honestly, I don't know as much about them as Aimee does. And I actually like have Googled the process of how trafficking works because I'm like, oh my God, there's this guy at Target. Can we bring our kids to Target anymore? And then I'm Googling it and finding like all of the things that Aimee just said. Like it's usually someone you know, and it's usually somebody who's been like that they know and that they've been targeting for a while. But it's just it so much constantly on social media can make you go crazy if you're just constantly absorbing these things. And I think even if you know it's not true, after you see it so many times, it just starts to seep in and you start to question whether things are actually scarier or more dangerous than they are. So it's very hard. I think it's going to be hard for the younger generation to really have a level gauge, I guess, on what is exactly like the important things to focus on and what should just be brushed away. So it's yeah, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, I think I saw a TikTok the other day, and it kind of hit me myself as a gym rat, as someone who goes to the gym frequently. I think it was there's some TikTok. It's like it was like POV going to the gym as a guy, and then it's like you just see some girls working out, and then like there's a camera already set up. It's like you just have to walk in, keep your head down, just move over. It's like the second you look up, it's like ah. It's like the second you look up, it's like dude was checking me out at the gym. It's like do not come here. It's like come on. Which I get that they were trying to be funny and all, but it's like at what point do we kind of, and I wonder like is that a form of like burnout where there's all these like serious cases of, like you said, stalking and trafficking. It's like, but then you see all these memes about it, and it's like we're kind of the fact that like we live in meme culture. Notice I didn't say we live in a society. Yeah, and I said it while denying having said it. It's like with meme culture, I'm just worried. Like, is it coming to the point where we're taking like serious cases and then making a bunch of memes about it? Because I remember even early on in 2014, again, this was pre-TikTok, during the when the first few of Bill Cosby's cases came out. I remember seeing there were memes about Bill Cosby, not so much Harvey Weinstein, but definitely like after the Surviving R. Kelly documentary, all the R. Kelly memes I saw, and I'm like, and it's like you're kind of like between a rock and a hard place, depending on the context of whatever the caption might be. But it's like you're kind of taking a serious scenario and then pretty much making a joke out of it. It's almost like, how dare you, in a way, like, and then really that kind of discredits all of the real cases, all of the actual cases that come forth, because then the fact that there's so many memes and so many jokes have been made about this one particular instance, it's like then once it actually does happen, nobody says anything about it. I'm sure we've all read the story of the boy who cried wolf. So yeah, I guess that's kind of like my worry going forward with social media. It's like, who knew that having unlimited access to technology could make everyone like just so much more like maybe it is like dumbing us down. Like at least before the internet, there was a follow through in terms of the information that you got and your sources and the validity of those sources. I think the fact that we've got literally 24/7 access to the internet. We've got like computers in our pockets now. You don't even have to, like, there was a time you were either on the phone or on the internet, one or the other. So I've been told. I don't know if that was an actual thing or not. Okay, I wasn't.
Check in with your parents.
I've heard the horror
War
stories.
stories of,
And then, we call it party music. You guys probably call it logging onto the internet. And, God forbid if that router got, dusty, you had to go to the back and, blow it out. And, I've seen movies. This is a TV film and pop culture podcast. All right. One of these days, I'd like to do an audio commentary of war games. Okay. But yeah, it's like the fact that it's the exact opposite today. It's like now you can access the internet from your phone whenever. But I'm wondering, like, is there less of a follow through in terms of the validity of the information that you're actually getting? It's like you're getting more information, like there's that convenience, but the trade-off is you don't know if it's actually factual.
Right. And I think that there's like these kind of like, I mean, I think that the world can exist in complexity, right? So, like, does the internet and constant connectivity, does it allow us to kind of like spread these kinds of stories that like are not based in fact and allow us to like fear the guy in Target or like a van driving around town? Yes. Like, I think that like that fear, easy storytelling without like necessarily following up on facts, like just allows those kinds of things to happen. On the other hand, one of the great things about like social media is it actually allows like, people to share their experiences. So like we get to hear like, so from women, like, why is it so scary to live in America, right? As women, right? Like, would I go jogging right now in my, like, what I think of as a very safe neighborhood? No, I would not, right? Like, would not go jogging at night right now. Like, do I like make sure I've got like my like keys between my like fingers? I don't know what that's going to do, but it just feels like, I'm like a little bit safer. It's just like we hear stories from women. We can, understand a little bit better about like why women are scared to like basically exist, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to say I wouldn't go jogging at night anywhere because in high school I watched the show Riverdale. Shout out to the CW.
What Riverdale taught me.
What Riverdale taught me. Yes. That's they taught me definitely. If there's nobody in a diner, if it's the afternoon and nobody's in a diner, you probably shouldn't be there either because serial killer on the run from the law is going to show up one of these days. If you ever don't go by a lake early in the morning, you're gonna find a dead body.
Yeah, I have my students do this like essay where they're supposed to write about like what they learned from like a pop culture like thing, and I've yet to get a Riverdale essay, but like I'm waiting for it. Is also what I'm saying. Like, where's my like don't go into a diner essay?
Yes, everybody who's in Ms. Baker's class. At what university do you teach at, actually?
State University of New York, Plattsburgh.
Okay, State University of New York, Plattsburgh. The enrollment is going to skyrocket because I have now mentioned this on this podcast. Everybody go and just specifically to take your class, okay? Like
specifically,
just for your class, okay? Somebody come in, write that essay on what you learned from Riverdale.
Yes, please.
No, I'm thinking like, it's funny. I was actually at the movie theaters back in January. It was for my birthday week. I saw Babylon, which is a movie you should see by yourself. Not exactly a date night go-to.
Got it.
If you've seen for the people who are listening to this episode, like if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And then there's one scene where I guess the one scene with Tobey Maguire, he was in the movie. They advertised him. He was in the movie for like 15 minutes.
Okay.
He's the whole reason I saw the movie. They go to this place that he says like is like the butthole of Hollywood or something. It's some like dark alley way, and there's like they walk in. There's some cage fight going on. There's a live alligator, and then Tobey Maguire's character finds out that the money that one character gave him was actually fake, and then there's like a sort of like a shootout scene where they gotta run out of this like alleyway, and I'm just like, and then my friend Michael, my friend Michael's next to me. I'm like, okay, so Michael, what did we learn? Like, all right, now kids, what did we learn? If some shady guy with a yellow smile tells you that he wants to take you to the asshole of wherever you live, what's the name? What's the name of the town that you guys live in? I forgot.
Plattsburgh. Yeah.
Plattsburgh. Yes, he says he wants to take you guys to the heartbeat of Plattsburgh after hours. What do? Run. What do we do? Call the cops.
Yeah.
And then run.
Lessons learned there.
Lessons learned. Yes. You see the power of cinema. This is why it is a high art.
Right.
It is a high art. You learn so much. Recently, it's like you learn so much.
That's why, like, my students are always like, "Oh, like, should I write my essay about what I learned from Jane Austen?" I'm like, "Well, okay, like you could, but like, do you want to, or do you want to write me like an essay about like what you learned from Babylon? Like, what did you learn from, Star Trek? Like, give me those essays. Like, I want those essays."
I mean, I took one film class. It's kind of the reason I have a podcast now. I took a film class in high school, Intro to Film Studies. Shout out to Mr. Maroney. And it was a half-year class. So for half a year, we watched movies and wrote essays about them and talked about them. Each of the films was had the recurring theme of surveillance. Like we watched The Conversation, we watched Rear Window, which is the only Alfred Hitchcock film that I've seen, now that I think about it. Eagle Eye, the Citizen Ford documentary, the Ed Snowden documentary from 2014, and then Snowden by Oliver Stone, which sort of like, I guess, is a dramatization of the events, a lot of the scenes from that documentary. We watched Her, an episode of Black Mirror. I think the last film we watched was Ex Machina, and all the films like had the recurring theme of like surveillance and like what do we learn and like film analysis, pretty much what I'm doing now with my podcast. And then I did take a class, African American cinema, my freshman year of college, and that class met once a week for like 2.5 hours. Again, half the class was just watching the movies. And I think we watched the movie 12 Years a Slave, and the professor did mention that, trigger warning, if there's any, scenes that, there were some scenes we had to just flat out skip at least like 30 minutes of the film. I'm thinking like Babylon, you might end up skipping at least like half of that movie. I feel just in like a school environment. Like I get that it's college and we're all adults and it's like we're all over 18. We're, of the age to watch, R-rated films, but oh boy. Yeah, I mean, let's analyze a period piece about the 1920s. It had Margot Robbie, so I wasn't going to not see it in theaters. Twice.
Well, for Margot Robbie,
yes, twice I saw it because I used the bathroom the first time. So yeah, I knew I had to go back and see it a second time. And also the soundtrack was kind of, they had a live bands. I'm wondering, like, the 1920s seemed like a pretty fun time. Alcohol was illegal.
our 20s era is given something.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh my
yeah. I'm just gonna like one of these days I'm just gonna tell my kids, look, the COVID-19 pandemic, COVID-19 was this disease that caused everybody to run out of toilet paper at the exact same time. Like, who knew? Okay, there's an infectious disease going on. Most important thing, toilet paper. Not food,
Toilet
not
paper.
water. Like, even you go back in, and I only know this because I've seen the documentary. I think we watched Bowling for Columbine in my 10th grade English class, and there was footage of like supermarkets on December 31st, 1999 with like Y2K approaching, and there were like people were stocking up on food and water and like actual like survival gear. And luckily at the strike of midnight, January 1st, 2000, nothing happened. But yeah, I'm like, that's how you prepare for the apocalypse, not toilet paper is like the most important thing.
And
Remember that.
COVID-19 is not even a digestive issue. So
Right. You said it's not even a what?
a digestive issue. It has nothing to do with
Oh, right.
toilet
It's not. Yeah, it's
paper.
not even a.
Yeah.
It's not even like a digestive. I actually never thought of that. Wow, I actually never thought of that. Oh boy, I'm gonna have some very, very interesting conversations. I feel like every generation, like we probably like will end up like doing dumb stuff that seems like a good idea at the time, but then as we get older, and then you've got kids, like, okay, now I have to go and explain all of this
Somebody. Yeah.
someone someday. Like, yeah. But I also think that well, pre-pandemic, I watched a video. I was at the Microsoft space in New York, because my background is engineering. Like, I'm actually going for my bachelor's in mechanical engineering, and I was a part of this extracurricular group called NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. Shout out to NSBE. And they had an event, Blacks at Microsoft, where we got to see the Microsoft building and a lot of the developing technologies that they had. They had a whole video put together of like technologies that they predicted would be on the market by like 2025, 2030. So this idea of like collaborating in different parts of the world, 2016, that wasn't really a thing yet. So a lot of these big tech companies, they were already on the path of how are we able to have services like Canva, where you can work on a PowerPoint, two people can work on a PowerPoint on opposite sides of the planet in different time zones, and video conferencing across time zones as well. COVID-19 accelerated that process of like everything being online and being on Zoom. I was fortunate enough to have been in college. I mean, I struggled myself with Zoom. I definitely think sophomore year was my worst year of college, just with COVID-19 and everything, and then learning on Zoom, which does not work for mechanical engineering. We're not just learning information; we're learning theories, and a lot of our classes have labs affiliated with them. You can't do those labs online. But I think particularly my younger siblings. Let's see, 2020. My youngest sister, Shelby, who she's in second grade now, she was still in preschool when the pandemic hit. She was still in pre-K. My brother Raymond was in seventh grade. My sister Corinne, who's a freshman in high school now, she was in sixth grade. So two in middle school, one in preschool, essentially. They all definitely struggled, and I think there was a loss of knowledge, I think, for their age group. Anybody who's in grade school now who had to go through the pandemic, being out of the classroom for like 1 to 2 years without any in-person instruction, especially being in like pre-K, kindergarten, those are the developmental like years, and them schools sending home a Chromebook and all that. I can't imagine like if I were their age if I were their age, 3 years ago. So I think you probably given another over the next like 10 to 15 years, we're going to see what the ramifications were of kids literally talking to a computer 6 hours a day, 5 days a week for like 10 months out of the year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're going to see what was that 1 year gap in like essentially human communication and like in-person instruction, in traditional education. Like what was that 1 year gap for so many children across the United States? Like we will see the ramifications when it's time for them to graduate high school and either join the workforce or go to college, and then they can't like stick to one task, or would prefer to talk to someone over Zoom as opposed to like meeting up in person. But that's my only worry, is that attention spans are going to get shorter, and that folks aren't going to be able to hold would be an hour and 15-minute conversations about yeah, well, I guess while I've got you guys here, I sort of stumbled upon the website for your documentary, She, and if you don't mind me reading like some of the reviews or
Sure.
Go for it.
well that, and I also I saw you guys have gotten a bunch of awards. I'll start with that. Best documentary film at the New Creators Film Awards, award winner at the Impact Docs Awards 2022, Boston Independent Film Awards, Best Documentary Feature, award winner Nashville Independent Filmmakers Festival last summer, Best Documentary Production, New York True Venture Film Festival, NYTVFF, Best Original Music, New Creators Film Awards. So I guess behind the scenes, well, okay, yeah, that was the awards themselves. Behind the scenes, like what was it like working with, was it Coco Jones?
Coco Jones.
Unfortunately, she's not joining us tonight.
I know.
I was gonna say, like, I've seen Let It Shine so many times. Like, that was the last great DCOM. Please at me. Anyone who's listening, that was the last great Disney Channel original movie. Sorry, Gen Z. I'm sorry. Okay.
So Jason, write to Coco and just be like, "We want you to know."
You should have. We want you to come on to Cobbs Corner. All right. We do TV,
Send that
we do
email.
film, we do pop
I can send her an emael.
yes, definitely. It was like working with such a amazing pop star, Coco Jones, or played a pop star, I should say.
She is too. She's like an amazing musician. She's just so incredibly multi-talented.
Mm-hmm.
Doing all kinds of different things right now. Yeah,
Mhm.
albums out and the new Bel Air show. So yeah,
She's busy.
yeah.
She's
No, it
on
was-
the new Bel Air show.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Coco Jones on the Bel Air.
Okay, cool.
She plays one of the sisters on there, and as well as her new album's out. So yeah. It was interesting working with all of the additional cast members that we had come in and do some of the narration and that for the film. It's the thing, like we were just talking about the Zoom meetings and this. I mean, one of the perks of this is we did a lot of this through Zoom. We did with Kate Mulgrew and Raven Goodwin. We actually did their recordings live in a studio where we directed them through Zoom. So we never met in person, but we were able to have those conversations and do that work from hundreds of miles away, which was really a kind of a cool.
Yeah, that's something we wouldn't have been able to do a few years ago. So it was really nice to be able to do it this way.
Yeah, and then we worked with Coco. Coco has her own recording studio space, so she did her recording herself. So it was more of a back and forth mostly through email conversations to get her recordings, get it into the film. But it was great to have different voices added to the film, and it makes a I think it made a big impact to the final product.
Yeah. So I guess I'm not gonna be able to have Coco on the podcast.
Morgan, I didn't even get to talk to Coco.
Yeah, I was gonna say that you guys are probably like signing NDAs and all. I don't want to get anybody into any trouble. Okay, like you all seem like very, very cool individuals. You guys, I mean, you're welcome anytime here on Cobbs Corner. Not done yet. Okay, but yeah, I mean, your film's gotten a lot of recognition. I'll read some of the reviews. Independent critic, she is the kind of film that inspires one to take action on behalf of the U.S.'s missing and unidentified women. UK film review, okay, so across the pond, an informative, moving, and powerful documentary. Film threat, she is an absolute triumph. The film is a glorious portrait of its subject and her very important poetry. And lastly, Essex on Lake Champlain. She is a true crime documentary with a surprising and refreshing twist. Yeah. So, yeah, I think all of these all of these reviews I agree with fully. I like how your documentary sort of ended with a call to action. It's like, now that we've got all these cases of missing women, now the solution is to spread the word. Yeah, the solution is always to kind of spread the word about these missing women. Like there was even a series of documentaries by I think the documentarian, his name is Tariq Nasheed, and you probably won't find any of his documentaries online. I think they're probably only in DVD format. He has a series of documentaries called Hidden Colors that talks about the hidden history of America, of Africa, of the world, and kind of, I guess, really just Black history throughout the world. And each documentary kind of focuses on a different aspect of it. But each documentary ends with a segment of solutions. It's like, okay, now that we've literally watched this hour-and-a-half documentary about, in your case, the missing women, it's like, what is the solution? How do we move forward? How do we learn from all these different cases? What shocked me was the Gurley case. I mean, that one was really just kind of unexpected. So she was married, and then her husband had
So she was married, and her husband was this con man. He convinced her that he was a doctor, which seems kind of in the framework of okay, that's typically what you would expect with a con artist kind of situation. But he was incredibly abusive to her during their relationship, and they separated, but he had also been having an affair with another woman, and he convinced that woman that he was an ancient alien who had been sent to Earth, and that she could join him and become his queen if she would help him murder his wife. And so we do know that that Gurley was killed, but she is yet to be found. But just sort of that weird turn. And so that was one of the challenges of writing that. How do you actually talk about that story without getting really centered on the oddity, absurdity of it? But yeah, that one completely baffles me, that someone that someone was completely taken in by a guy who was saying he was an ancient alien. If anyone's watching here, if you start dating someone and they they say they're an ancient alien. Like, just that's a red flag. Like, just all the red flags.
Yes, for sure. That is
Yeah.
for sure a red flag. I definitely have never ever used that scenario on anyone ever. Okay.
Yeah. No, don't recommend.
I definitely have not lied in order to get ahead and claim to be a multi-billionaire or Lord von Matterhorn. That's one of the plays, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with How I Met Your Mother.
Mhm.
The playbook. There was the Lord von Matterhorn, I think, and it's like I guess like pretty much Barney like walks into a bar and he goes like, "Yeah, it's me," and then he like introduces himself as like Lord von Matterhorn, and then it's like she like looks up Lord von Matterhorn and then finds a bunch of fake articles about like he's traveled the world in like a hot air balloon. It's like,
Oh God.
I'm thinking like,
Yeah.
I kind of want to try that out now.
No, don't. I don't recommend. Not a recommended pathway.
Now, to my majority male audience, don't ever do anything like that.
No. No.
I will find you.
We will all know. We will feel it in the air.
Not just me. Me, Amy, Jason, Vanessa, we're all going to find you and
yes,
shut you down. All right?
Yes. Yeah. We'll have a talk about appropriate
intervention, about appropriate pickup lines.
Oh.
This is not a dating and relationship podcast. I'll leave that to I will leave that to the Fresh and Fit podcast. I will leave that to them. But yeah, I mean that case was very weird. I'm wondering at what point did you like a lot of the cases were probably difficult to read, just as how in like I brought up the instance how in my African American cinema class, like we had to kind of cut out a lot of the scenes from like certain scenes from certain movies because they're like a bit of a tough watch. Like even movies that are kind of like based off true stories. Like I've even like kind of walked out of some movies. Like I saw the movie Detroit back in 2017 with my dad. The movie's literally about like 3 murders that happened during the Detroit riots. So, some of those scenes were, for mature audiences only. I'm wondering if like, for you, Amy, and I guess also for you, Jason and Vanessa, when you were looking into these cases, like were any of these cases like so grueling and so just like, I don't know, like scary to read, like to the point where you almost don't want to find out more information? Like were you ever like, I don't know, I guess like scared to the point where it's like on one hand you have responsibility like as journalists and as filmmakers to kind of expose the truth, but then also we're all humans and we all kind of have that threshold of what we can actually handle. And like I recognize like that threshold is kind of like different for everyone's like, what you will and won't actually sit through on screen, or like stories that you maybe aren't comfortable reading or talking about publicly. Like did any of you encounter like any of that while putting together this documentary?
I'm gonna make Vanessa go first because she has, I think, a lower threshold than I have.
I think just being some of the cases. So a lot of them, we're talking missing women, but a lot of these were children. So for me, that was disturbing. A lot of the women we talk about are girls that are under 18. A lot of them are around 13, 14, which at the time when we started this project, our daughter was 13. So it was very hard for some of this. And I think it's actually made me a bit more of an overprotective parent than I think I would have been. And our son is just a little bit older than she is. And so I know that like in our film, we're talking about things that happen to women, but I mean, a lot happens to young men too. So it just, I think overall I found it, the age is disturbing. I found a lot of, I found it disturbing that there are so many Jane Does that are not, like, nobody's looking for these people, and there's just, so I think these are a lot of things that Aimee had been aware of for a long time through her project with writing Doe, and I think there were things that we're kind of a little bit aware of, but then one of the things that impacted me when I was reading her book was just how frequently this happens, and like we were saying before, some of the age ranges. I think in your book, Aimee, you're talking, I think the youngest one was 8 and the oldest one was she in her 70s? So I mean, that's something you don't think about either. So it's just, I think being forced to think about it and really meet those victims kind of makes you feel differently about it than where we came from, consuming true crime mostly as just as everybody's seeing it, like you're saying, like the Dahmer series and some of those other things, where it's very much it's put in like this movie place, right, where it's a real story, but we're mostly using it for like
Dramatization.
value. Yeah, dramatization. So to see it from the other point of like, oh wow, these are things that happen, these are things that affect people, that was, I think it was troubling that way. But so I don't think it was any one case. I think it was just the quantity of them, and a lot of, like, not saying that it's any less when it's someone over 18, but I think when it's someone under 18, you feel almost more protective in a way, because that child is not independent yet, and why is nobody looking for them, and why is nobody protecting them? And so it's just like a lot of questions, I think, that come into my mind. Not that anybody wasn't or isn't, but that's where you jump to as a mom, you know? So.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
I totally can understand where you're coming from. I think the fact that, I guess, Aimee, you had you had brought up how there's that disproportionate amount of Black women who go missing as opposed to white women. Like, I can only imagine. Like, I have two younger sisters. One's 14 and one's 8. So I mean, I can only imagine like how protective my mom must be of the two of them. I mean, granted, you know, the one who's in high school, I mean, she's an athlete, and she doesn't really like, she's really just hanging out like with her teammates, and you know, she's not really like boy crazy or anything like that. Shout out to Corinne if you're listening. I couldn't say that on mic. But I can only imagine not just her being a young woman, but being a woman of color in America, and the fact that she's one of the few girls of color at her school. You know, she goes to a private Catholic school in a predominantly, the area that we live in is predominantly Caucasian. You know, I can only imagine like how protective my mom is of, well, I guess my mom and also my dad, of really all 4 of us, but I think especially my 2 younger sisters. You know, because I feel like growing up, my parents weren't like, I was never taught that like the world is like evil or wicked or anything, but I was always taught that I'd have to work twice as hard, you know, simply because of the color of my skin. And maybe it's different for me as a guy. I mean, I personally never have like gone out at night and felt like I'm gonna not make it home or anything. I mean, even being one of the few scouts of color in my Boy Scout troop, like most meetings, I'm the only person of color in the building. You know, but I've never particularly like felt uncomfortable about that. I've never really had any problems had any problems with that fact. I mean, there was one time where, and this is in the town that I grew up in, Naugatuck. We don't live there anymore. There was a time, I think I was 16 and it was raining and I was randomly stopped by the police one day. I mean, all because I don't know, he said I fit the description or something. There was somebody asking folks for money. I mean, he let me go. He had no reason to stop me, honestly.
Right.
But I mean, it's just shit like that, I mean, happens on a daily basis. I mean, I didn't really process it at first, but I could have, and it's crazy that we literally live right up the street from the police department. It's you see this stuff on the news, all these cases of, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Eric Gardner. That could have been me. More recently, George Floyd. I mean,
yeah,
that could have been me that day. Thank God it was not. But between all of those kinds of cases, I think really that was kind of the wake up call, and for me, I guess. And I think that was when I started having more and more of those kind of tough conversations with my parents. And I think with your documentary, I can only imagine and again, I don't really know because I'm not at home 24/7.
right.
But my mom has probably had those separate conversations with my sisters about if you're out late at night, I mean, just be cautious. I keep on wondering, who am I going to get that 2 a.m. phone call from? I almost say it half jokingly, because now that I got 2 younger siblings in high school, and one's, well, she's got years. She's in second grade. She's got a while. I'm wondering who's going to give me that 2 a.m. can you come pick me up phone call. It's oh yeah, I'm over at a friend's house, and now don't kill me.
Right.
Right. Might have had a little too much to drink. I'm gonna send you the address. Don't to find out, I'm you're not gonna believe this, but I'm at the same party. All right, let me get you.
Yeah, I mean, at least yeah, I mean, it's good that your siblings actually have someone that they can call, right?
Yeah.
I did not have that growing up, and so I'm a survivor of various different kinds of violence, so my tolerance for sort of investigating these cases and thinking about these cases is a little bit different. I get angrier. Unlike Vanessa, I don't think I've actually had a conversation with my kid about safety or anything.
You haven't?
No.
Wow.
So when I think about the cases that were there cases that I had to not do or no. I mean, there's cases that made me angrier. We talked in the film, I talk about there's a unidentified woman from Alaska who was a victim of a serial killer who hunted his victims in Alaska, literally put them in a plane and flew them to the wilderness and hunted them in the wilderness. And so that, those kinds of stories fill me with rage. But I still wrote about them. I still think about them. And there's cases that I didn't include in Doe that I didn't turn away from out of whoa, this is too much, but more out of I'm not sure how I would capture the complexity of it or the nuance of it within the short form of a poem, right? Yeah.
Right. It's brain has stopped. I've just been like sort of like stalling and just thinking of like, okay, like what's the next question? What's the next question? But no, I mean that's it's great. I mean, yeah, it's interesting, I guess, Aimee, that
Mhm.
you haven't, well, that you have that threshold, and I'm sorry for any sort of like, you said that you're like a survivor of
Mhm.
whatever that is, and you don't have to
Mhm.
speak about it if you don't want to,
Right.
but you definitely with this documentary, you definitely brought attention to an issue that is it's not commonly addressed. So I thank you for your book, and you are definitely touching the lives of countless individuals, and there's lots of cases that will see the light of day.
Mhm.
No, well, I guess cases of like missing persons cases that will see the light of day because of your documentary. There was a series on Netflix called, I think, 100 Humans, and I think it
Mm.
was like they did like scientific and like social experiments, and I didn't finish watching this particular episode,
Mhm.
but I think it was an episode where there was like group A and group B, and they were supposed to, it was like a mock trial sort of, where like each group was they were each jurors, and they were shown like images of the defendant. Each defendant was charged with the same crimes and whatnot, and then, but it's like, do we as humans, are we more sympathetic towards, say, those who kind of fit, like you were saying earlier in this
Mhm.
episode, the like typical Western, beauty standard, or the
Mhm.
the damsel in distress,
Yeah.
sort of like
Yeah.
are we more sympathetic to the, say, the damsel in distress versus the guy who looks as if he could be a serial killer? I mean, I can only imagine how quick the jury decision was for Harvey Weinstein's case. I mean, he probably like showed up in the courtrooms like guilty. I mean, he looks like a okay, um, but but um, but yeah, I'm wondering, like, are we more sympathetic, like not just in terms of when women go missing, but
Mhm.
also cases where that's very rare, where women are actually the guilty party, and where women are
Mhm.
the perpetrators, or where men are framed for actions, and really women are the guilty party. It's like, but if she sort of fits that archetype, or that avatar, I should say, she fits that sort of profile, fits that beauty standard,
Mm.
then they usually get off scot free.
I mean, I think, you know, the way in which like America responds to who perpetrators are is incredibly complex. But I was just thinking as you were talking, like the inspiration, the start of me writing this book was there was a young woman who was thrown from a vehicle as it left Phoenix, Arizona. And I'd been living in Phoenix at the time um, that I heard about her story. So 9 years before, she had been thrown from this vehicle, and passerbys found her immediately, tried to get her help. They brought her to the hospital, and she ended up passing away, but she didn't have any identification on her, right? And I just remember like the moment of seeing her drawing, and it was such a terrible drawing. It was like this like line sketch, like Jason and Vanessa included it in the documentary, but this is terrible drawing of her. Like she looked like she was wearing like Victorian clothing. It was just a really odd drawing, but like in the picture you could tell like she was incredibly beautiful by Western standards. She had blonde hair, right, and she was young, and I personally was like immediately captivated by her story and like wondering who she was and how was it that she hadn't been identified yet. So I think like it's good to like recognize in yourself like what you're responding to and why. But I think we make it to like what you're responding to without like that questioning sense of it, right? So like
Yeah.
why her story? Why was her story being told in the first place? What is it that captured my attention in the first place, right?
Yeah. I guess maybe then it becomes a question of psychology and sociology, which I understand is not your background, but
Mhm.
I was going to say, like, is there an implicit bias that we as humans, like, do we always just have this sort of implicit bias or like tropes sort of like associated with with um a lot of these cases? Because even you had said how like you really like after that drawing and realizing that she was, you know, blonde hair and blue eyes, like you couldn't really explain why you felt as if this person needed to be found, but you did. Not saying that you wouldn't have felt the
Mhm.
same way about someone who didn't
Mhm.
fit that standard, but maybe we as humans, maybe we as a society, um, maybe we just have that sort of implicit bias. And I wonder, like, is it the fault of the media? Like, is this something that's ingrained in our minds? Like, are we just programmed a certain way? Like, is it biological? Is it sociological? Like, I'm not
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I wish
really
I
like
was
a
a
philosophical
sociologist,
question.
but but like,
Yeah, and really, that's just like a philosophical bombshell I just
right,
dropped.
right, right. It's like what is that thing? I mean, I think like as a writer, like one of the great things about being a writer is that you get to like take those problems and turn them around in your head and like, you know, think about it, right? Like, um, I mean, I would say like I don't know from a sociological perspective, I don't know where that comes from, like what drives it. But I think like it's our duty to like interrogate that, right? Like it's our duty to like not just accept and continue on, but actually like, you know, it's kind of like before when I was saying like it's a matter of attention and like value, right? So like it is within our control, it is within our power to question, do we have a bias? Where is that coming from? How am I going to like personally change that? Right. Um, and you know, not just with like matters of race or socioeconomic backgrounds, but like, you know, like I found myself like arguing the other day, like, you know, the woman that I said like had been taken to the wilderness and hunted. Like my poem for her is about the fact that like she was a sex worker, and that gets like, you know, she gets like there's all that blame and asking for it narrative, right?
Right, right.
Right.
I was gonna say, I guess that was the other like earlier when I was talking about like socioeconomic standard
Mm-hmm.
is, and you had pointed out how one of the missing persons cases, she was a sex worker.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
so there, I guess the media kind of comes in, and it's like, are we sort of painting this narrative of this person was a sex worker, she knew what she was getting into, kind of thing, and then but then it's almost like a form of like dehumanization. It's like you're sort of trying to separate this, like the fact that or you're trying to like use like the fact that she was like a sex worker, you think that sort of like trumps or cancels out invalidates, like just flat out invalidates the experience that she had, the validation of invalidates like the experience that she had, and the fact that she was like violated, whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
You know, like even in cases of rape, even going back to the Trump case, it's like the second that someone says no, and I mean, this is like a PSA for like anyone listening, man or woman.
Mhm.
The second you hear the word no, you back the fuck off.
Mhm.
Point blank.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah,
so,
I,
so
you know,
yeah.
and you know, even taking that a step further, like if someone is also silent, right? Like if they're not giving like actual, you
Right.
know, confirmation, you know, but like it's the ways that we craft like these narratives and structures in our heads to say like who matters and who doesn't, right? So like I just remember like I had a conversation with someone who I was like talking about like, you know, some women who are missing are sex workers and their stories need to be heard, and they were like, we don't need to get political. And I was like, what is political about saying like people matter, right? Like
Right.
yeah.
Well, and I think
There's
one of the things I've learned from you too, Aimee, like while doing this project,
yeah.
is I hadn't really been paying attention. I think that a lot of those things that we see typically when a woman goes missing, and like you said, she's young and, you know, beautiful and blonde and comes from a great family, and we see that, and I think everybody sees that this girl's missing, and they're like, what possibly could she have done wrong to deserve this? So therefore, she's worth looking for. Where when I started reading your poems and talking to you, I realized that like those girls that are sex workers or struggle with addiction, or the young girls that might be a runaway, people just seem to see them often. I don't know if you would say this, but the feeling I get is that they're almost like disposable in a way, like objects to be used and thrown away. Where when we see this typical beauty, everybody's like thinking, I think that there's like a higher value to that particular woman, which doesn't make any sense, because, you know, each person has a life worth living regardless of where they are in their life. So I think we are kind of programmed that way a little bit, to have that bias, and to and I think a lot of it just comes from what we're seeing in the news, and it's sad.
Yeah.
I think as a baseline, like what needs to happen and why I think this whole documentary did such a great job of highlighting all of these different stories of missing women. We need to have a sort of a standard where everybody's life is valued equally, where everyone, you know, regardless of your age, race, gender, you know, if we really believe in this country that I know it says all men are created equal, but really that includes everyone. You know, everyone's created equal. You know, we're all entitled to those unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, a lot of times there is a lot of like paradoxes in that, and there's a lot of like, you know, grandfather clauses in this whole life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. I think with all the progress that has happened in America and really just in the world, we as humanity need to have like a baseline where we see everyone as equal. We see everyone as a human being, and you see whether it's a missing person or a woman who was raped, regardless of her background, you know, regardless of the background, like, but being able to have the same sort of reaction, that same pathos for someone who has had a negative life experience, whatever the case may be, like even outside of the realm of like rape, like being able to recognize that we are all human at the end at the end of the day. So seeing seeing these cases of like missing persons and seeing cases of like rape, sexual assault, whatever the case may be, being able to recognize that that is wrong and whatever happened to that person should not have happened, and having a demand for justice outside of the sphere of the media, and even maybe even outside of the sphere of the government, because we the people, we don't work for CNN, we do not work for President Biden. He works for us. They work for us. They work on behalf of the people. The first words of the Constitution: we the people of the United States. In order to form a more perfect union, this is how we form that more perfect union. And we hold these lawmakers accountable. We hold even the news anchors who are not giving these certain cases the time of day. We force them to cover it. They don't want to cover it. All right, we will cover it ourselves on our own independent platforms. So creating a benchmark where everyone's life is valued equally. That is the solution.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because like
today's episode.
Just like that notion that like that people matter, right? Like that's not a political statement. That's just like how we should exist, right? Like I just feel like sometimes like we have these like check boxes in our head, like we go through like this list of like attributes or life experiences, and like as we're hearing stories, we're like checking those boxes, and the end result is like, oh well, I should care less about this person, like when really, like, if you're checking those boxes, the likelihood is you should be caring more, right? They deserve more care.
So at that point, then you, like, if your mind goes to a place where you're checking those boxes, then really they're not the problem. You are the problem, and you have to recognize your own personal biases and not just thinking something, but questioning, why do I think this way?
Exactly.
Why do I feel a certain way about a certain topic? Is it how I was raised? Have I been programmed to think a certain way? And I think that's how you have like a healthy dialogue, a healthy like discussion about really anything.
Anything. Right.
But I mean, do you guys want to talk more about your documentary? Just tell everyone like what you guys have going on, and like where we can watch this amazing documentary that I recommend each and every one of my listeners to go and watch this documentary.
It's available on most of the major streaming platforms now. Amazon, Vudu, Vimeo. If you go to our website, officialshe.com, there's actually links to all of the different streaming services there that you can click on, depending on if you have a favorite or not.
Link in the description.
But yeah, I mean that was our hope. Our hope is just to get it out there, have as many people watch it as they can, and hopefully we did a good job, and it'll help.
No. I personally think you guys did an amazing job with this documentary, and I will definitely be looking forward to that email from Coco Jones, and possibly getting Coco Jones on Cobbs Corner. My views would just go through the roof. Yep, just and then Tyler Jackson Williams is next. All right. But yeah, guys, check out this documentary. Wherever, I'm gonna put a link to the official website in the show notes below. Check out this documentary. I think it's available for rent on Amazon Prime. I think I watched it on Amazon Prime. It's available for rent. I'm not sure if it's available to stream for free on any of these
Not yet.
platforms?
Not yet.
Not yet, but
Hopefully soon. Yeah.
hopefully, yes. Hopefully soon. Check out this documentary and, just be nice to each other in the world, guys. Whatever Chris Hardwick says at the end of Talking Dead, that's a deep cut for my fellow Walking Dead fans. Yeah, it's like, don't text and drive. Be nice to each other, guys. Don't be a donkey. And watch She. Available on most platforms. It's a really amazing documentary that everyone must check out. If you did you guys have any like upcoming projects or anything you guys wanted to plug, like as we're ending, like
Jason and Vanessa are doing things.
We've got a couple documentaries, a couple more documentaries in the works, but nothing that's too far along to share out yet. But I believe we'll have some trailers up soon through our website.
Okay, and what's your website? Just for the
birdyandbeanfilms.com is our company website.
Bernie and Bean.
Birdy.
Birdy and Bean.
Yeah.
Okay. Birdy and Bean. Definitely check them out. Aimee, you want to, I guess, well, not like if you have anything coming up, but I guess you said you have a class you teach at the State University of New York.
Right. Well, I am ending my time as a faculty member this semester, so it's my last semester teaching. I mean, if anyone wants to hire me to teach creative writing, I'm available.
Okay. Yeah. Hey. I mean, Professor Naraki, I think she's the head of the English department at UB.
I'm actually working with I cannot disclose too much legally, actually, but I'm working with someone to tell her memoir. It's a true crime memoir, telling her story, and it's incredible, and she's an amazing woman, so I can't wait until I can share more details about her and her experience and like the really amazing things that she has done.
All right. You guys got any like social media handles you guys want to put out there?
I am everywhere as Aimee, AIMEE .E.Baker.
All right. And I know you guys got like Birdy and Bean.
Yeah, Birdy and Bean Films and She documentary.
All right. Yeah, Birdy and Bean Films, She documentary. All really good stuff. We have chatted for the last 2 hours.
We have done it.
We've done it. Hooray. If you guys enjoyed today's episode, then be sure to two things. One, watch the She documentary, available on most streaming platforms, and subscribe to Cobbs Corner because I will usually drop a new episode Fridays at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So subscribe, turn on those post notifications, and tune into our Thursday night live streams. I do live streams every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Current Nerd News. We are the real CNN. Yes, the real CNN logo is coming soon. So tune in to Current Nerd News every Thursday night, 7 p.m., and it should be available on all streaming platforms the following Monday. That is all we've got for today. I hope that you all enjoyed your stay here at Cobbs Corner. Special thanks to our guests, Jason, Vanessa, and Aimee.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Oh.